Hi everybody, Dr. Pingle here. Got a sort of a big dispatch, I suppose, from Break. Spent the last few days pretty deep diving into remote ID, and so a lot to share before I forget. Before I get into that, a couple of smaller things. One was this article came to me via Google Scholar. It's a large-scale 3D building reconstruction in LOD2. This kind of led to some really interesting discoveries. The first of which was just sort of Googling this name and came across this, which is a very similar title, but a totally different paper. This is some software that's available on GitHub, City 3D, that's by some different authors, but can take a airborne laser scan point cloud and turn it into reasonably good looking meshes. They're nice and straight, good inferences about roof shape. So it's a lot better than just sort of like a simple, DSM or something. Sides of the building are still straight, so not a huge fan of that. But it's, LOD2, I suppose. So that's not too bad. Ran across this. This is 3Difier or 3D Fire. It seems to be really oriented towards LOD1, which I think is a little passe at this point. So I'm not all that interested in this, but it's a good resource perhaps for something. There was a nice description here. I hadn't really, LOD is level of detail. The City GML specification has a couple of nice definitions for what these different LODs are specifically, which I think is something I'll probably mention the next time I teach geovisualization. But LOD1 is sort of just extruding the roof up to a flat expression. LOD2 would include a shape to the roof, but also things like overhangs. LOD3 would include entry points into the shape, so windows and doors. And LOD4 would include non-movable parts of the interior of a building. And that led me to this, which is an HD mapping project built on the Livox Mid 360, which we own. Actually just got a Raspberry Pi for a separate project, but can put it on this. And as far as I can tell, it's basically those two things plus probably a battery to get the whole thing running. There's a 3D printed enclosure. Seems pretty straightforward. So I think we kind of have to give this a try. I'm excited about it, only just a little bit weary of a lot of these kinds of projects lately. But I think this is, by all rights, this is kind of everything we've been waiting for. The Mid 360 is very light. This potentially gets us something that we could put on a drone and do SLAM live with a very lightweight drone. So pretty great. Doing some of the drone research, I found that there's a Hexoon 6 rotor kit. Probably not something we're likely to build, but very good to know about. So this is the 860. Says it can carry a 2 kilogram payload. It can use a LiPo 6S battery. So this was cool. And then a larger project here. This is the 690. So another great, interesting project. We've got to replace the propellers on the Mavic 3T. We only had 2 on hand apparently, so we ordered some more. I think I may have the link for those that I ordered here on the next slide. The official ones that you should get, the Mavic 3 Enterprise propellers are technically a little bit different than the general Mavic 3Ts. So it's the 9453, but the Enterprise uses the 9453F. The DJI forums themselves seem to indicate that they are more or less interchangeable. They look different. I wouldn't have both on the same craft at the same time, but I don't really see any problem in using one or the other. This is what we did get. So this is the Mavic 3. Carl had brought the last ones, and these are what he ordered. So I think we'll probably just commit to this kind of moving forward. Master Airscrew has a good reputation. There's a lot of sort of knockoff propellers that I wouldn't trust with a drone like that. But Master Airscrew has a great reputation in the industry, and they've got a 4-piece set for $42. They claim slightly improved flight time, whatever. But good to have an alternative. Again, I wouldn't mix these, but seems useful. I don't know, I'm not even sure where this came across. This might have been Google Scholar, but this is Llama Mesh. A way to use the large language models to talk to meshes. And this is really exciting, gives us an opportunity to leverage that technology against potentially some big data sets. I don't know what the limit on this is going to be. They have a Hugging Face demo, which I tried. Pretty interesting. You could do a little bit with this, but they also have a Blender add-on, which seems quite powerful. If we wanted to do something interesting without a lot of coding, I think this is probably the way to do it. We've got some large sort of installers that would just slap right in, I think. And then the interesting thing was like that you can talk to it, not always just that it can generate a mesh, which is cool, but you could upload a mesh and then ask it questions. So I don't know what the limits here are. The one, I think one thing that came to mind initially was, well, can we get the language models to talk to a point cloud? I think you probably could. I'm not quite sure how you'd. I don't know. I mean, the adaptation there isn't as straightforward because I don't know what the linkages are. Meshes are pretty similar to language in that you're sort of connecting these different ideas, and things sort of have relationships, and there's like a syntax. I don't know what point cloud language learning models would look like. But it's an interesting question. What I do know is that we can do it with the DEM, right? So we can take a DEM, render it as a mesh, right? A tin. You can always take a DEM and turn it into a tin, and then talk to it. So I think that's kind of the next move. I did try to use the Hugging Face demo to do this. You can definitely paste OBJs in there, but it just didn't have enough computational power on the little demo to handle it. So I think the next step is to install it locally. I think we can use Llama file to do it, and then have it talk to the weights that are in Llama Mesh. I don't know that for sure. And I thought about trying it before this, but this dispatch is already pretty lengthy, so I think we'll save it for next time. The animated, this is sort of a random idea. I don't remember what I was doing, but one of my perpetual complaints is that I sort of find transportation maps to be not very good. And this is true for bus apps, and this is bus maps, I should say, and this is true for bike maps. I find both of them super awkward to use. Incomplete, don't give me a good sense of how I would want to get from here to there. And so one of the ideas that I had was animating bus maps, right? Being able to sort of see the pattern visually and then understanding the system that way rather than through a bunch of text and tables. I don't know if anybody's done this. I think it's a good idea. Make a pretty well-defined, simple project that someone could do. So I'd love to see this. Yeah, so the big project here is working on trying to get my Here4 GPS on the Busy Bee installed and get Remote ID installed. So it's been grounded now since the Remote ID rule came out. I bought the Here4 GPS Blue, which has an integrated Remote ID module. And the nice thing about the Here4 is that it's got multi-band / dual band. It's got an L5 RTK GPS on it. So I thought, well, this will be good for a couple of different reasons. The Here3 was on it, which is an RTK module, but only single band. So Basically, this technology is built off of the equivalent CubeID technology. Probably more or less, they've just like wedged one of these things inside it. The whole thing connects via the CAN interface. It's NDAA compliant. Lots of good stuff about it. I did find out that it can operate as an independent flight controller, which is cool. But boy, the instructions are bad. There's just not much there, and it's going to be a kind of a recurrent theme through this. But wow, the whole Cube Pilot ecosystem is struggling. Which I've been working in this ecosystem for a while, and I love it, but geez, documentation is so bad. Stuff isn't updated. Questions in the forums get ignored. Yeah, bad stuff. So I tried to assemble sort of the idea behind the installation, so I'm going to try to characterize that now. Physically, the mounting was the same, so the HERE 3 popped right off and the HERE 4 popped right on, and I had very nicely left a good spot to access the screw that I needed to get it on and off, so I didn't even have to take anything apart. I'd started taking stuff apart and then like taking the bottom plate off and realized I could just get at this one screw. So that was good. The configuration was exactly the same. So all of the same sort of like CAN driver and whatever NFD LED lights and whatever the settings are were exactly the same as the HERE 3. So it was pretty much plug and play. This didn't happen right away, but I ended up figuring that the best thing to do is to take the CAN 2 port and disable it so I could plug in the other CAN connector. I don't know why it has two. I think that they're not actually doing anything with those two, but they have sort of like grandiose plans to do something with it. I don't know. But having them both plugged in without disabling this CAN P2 driver led to some problems. So I think this is the thing to do, although I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure on that. I upgraded the firmware both on the unit, which had some crash reports when I got it, which is why I didn't install it right away. Something about like if it's on for an hour, then something bad happens. I upgraded the firmware in the HERE 4 unit itself, which was pretty easy. Those instructions were fairly straightforward. You find once you get it talking to the unit, you can go to the CAN page on the setup and connect to it. So that documentation is all quite good. I updated the firmware on the drone itself. That was pretty easy. Yeah, I still haven't tested it because I don't have the remote ID working yet. But that's sort of talk about that in a minute. I upgraded the HERE 4. The rover actually has a HERE 4. It's not the blue because it doesn't need the remote ID. But that was pretty easy. Again, you're sort of clicking on that nav link, CAN 1. It finds things. You go to the menu button. There's an upgrade button. Super easy. I am sort of getting a recurrent message that it's asking to update it, even though it has been updated and the version that's on there is newer. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Somewhere I saw a change log, but I don't remember whether it was the HERE 4 or something else now. But anyway, moving on. This is where the drone one started. So before I did the upgrade, it was at 1.11. It needs like a certain version of 1.14. And now I think it's on 1.15, which I guess I don't have here. Lots of settings. I didn't mess with this VTX enable, but it does toggle the video transmitter on and off, which was kind of a neat feature to take note of. And then the tricky part is sort of being able to talking to the HERE 4 was easy. Talking to the remote ID on it was not. And that's, I think, partly intentional on their part. They don't really want people messing around with this. As far as I can tell, they're trying to speak to drone manufacturers, and they don't really care about the DIY people They don't. It's the remote ID for the here 4 and for the cube ID is not intended to be a broadcast module. It is intended to be a, what is it called, standard remote ID, which means that it's integrated when the drone is built and it stays put and it never changes and it's locked in place. So, so to get it installed, you have to build a custom firmware. And at first I was really put off by this. I was like, oh man, I'm never going to waste my time figuring out how to build a firmware for ArduPilot. I'm never going to need this. But it turns out that if you go to custom.ardupilot.org, there's just a menu, some checkboxes. It builds it for you. You download it. It's pretty easy to do. I was really put on the wrong track and lost several hours from this post, which I probably should reply to and just be like, hey, look, it's not a matter of Orange Plus. I'll try to remember to do that after this recording. But yeah, it was basically it said like you can't. There's no version of this with the Cube Orange Plus, which sort of implies that there's no version, that there is a version with the Cube Orange. Yeah. It says we are using the Cube Orange Plus, which doesn't currently have an official ODID build as far as I'm able to tell, but I followed the instructions here. Nothing has an official ODID build as far as we can tell. There's a lot of, I've got a slide at the end of this. So it's basically something like word soup. There's a lot of these combinations of like remote ID and open drone ID and Ardu remote ID and just endless variants of that. So I can't even totally pretend to understand all of this. This is where you kind of want to start, I suppose, especially if you're a manufacturer. But this has a lot of information on it. To build the firmware, pretty easy. All you need to do is go to this custom.ardupilot.org. In the upper right-hand corner, you can do like add build, select the vehicle version and board that you have, and then go to this ident tag and check open drone ID. It'll build it for you, and then you download it. Only takes a couple of minutes, and then it adds it to this big list. I think that it tries to keep track of everything. I'm a little unclear, but I think it tries to keep track of the stuff that it's built. So if somebody builds something with the exact same parameters, it's going to point you to it rather than rebuild it. I wouldn't bet my life on that, but it seems to be true. So you get this stuff. I downloaded it. There's the directory for the local build that I downloaded, and then the link to it online, which I'm fairly sure is the right link. Yeah. This is not mine. This is the first one that I clicked on erroneously. You can tell because it says Speedy Beef instead of Cube Orange Plus. So this is not mine. But this is kind of what it looks like when you go to download these things. The firmware for the Cube is pretty small, a couple of megabytes in total. So download all of these files, and then you go to the Load Custom Firmware tab, which is at the same firmware loading. That part went fine. I guess I'll mention that when I did that, I had to plug into the back of my computer, so it didn't really work through the front USB bus. I don't know, because it thought it was a hub or something. I don't know, but it did work when I put it in the back. Sometimes the firmware updates in the past couple of days have been a little dicey. I don't know. Maybe the cable is dicey. I don't know. Yeah, so once you load the custom firmware, then you get this DID enable, which you can set to 1. And once you do that, then you get all of these other things: DID Barrow, CAN driver, enable, Mavport, and options. And then you can start making those edits. A couple of things that you do want to do: you're going to want to set the DID CAN driver to 1. That was easy. Then you can talk to it. And then for the longest time, it was like there's all these things that are like, go to the drone ID tab. Well, that didn't exist. And I went down a rabbit hole that said well, you have to get the beta updates. You go to help, and then there's beta updates, and you can update those, and still didn't show up. Well, it turns out that it's in there. You just have to right-click on those tabs and turn on this tab drone ID. And yeah, I probably only lost an hour or two to that, but like, geez, this stuff added up. Really poor documentation spread out over um, a bunch of different discussion sections, and people just not even saying, well, when they got stuff working, and they're like, yep, got it to work, and they don't say how. Oh, just a lot of complaints. Um, okay, so at that point, it was enabled, set the settings, and it started talking. There's a little bit of hand waving here because I feel like at this point I was still messing around with that second CAN connection. I don't know, but eventually I turned on sort of apps that you can use, Air Sentinel and Open Drone ID or OSM, or a couple of them for Android, and I downloaded them both, and they both worked. And then you can see it, right? You can see where the operator is, and you can see where the drone is, and it did totally work. So that part is good. I was getting a remote ID. I could actually set the UAS ID with the drone ID tab in Mission Planner. So right there it says ASDF, and so on. It's got the UA type, helicopter, multi-rotor. So that part all worked. What didn't work is on the here link, there's a tab that says Remote ID. You can hit this tab that says Enable RID. You can fill in all this stuff, but it didn't seem to go anywhere. So I don't know why not. The controller was definitely otherwise talking to the drone. So I could set these things with Mission Planner. I could not set them with HereLink. I'll mention just here that if you set your DID options to, like, I don't know, 4 or something like that, part of what that does is there's 3 switches in there, and one of those switches will lock everything in place, so you can no longer edit them. So if you did know the serial number, you could put that in there, and I guess I'll get to this in a second, but essentially it doesn't have a serial number. So on the remote IDs that you buy, they're sort of these standalone broadcast units. Those will have a serial number, and you can just literally plug that into the FAA website. But these don't, and the reason is that they're intended for manufacturers, and manufacturers have to get their own serial numbers that go in there. So kind of a long story. And I spent a lot of time on this. I can't say that I fully understood the difference between broadcast modules and standard modules when I started. I think I understand them now. The gist is that manufacturers, when they build it, they make what's called a declaration of compliance with the FAA that says that it has been integrated exactly as it is supposed to have been integrated. But for casual builders, you have to use a broadcast unit, basically. There's no kind of middle ground of like, don't just want to stick a battery-operated transponder on my drone. I want it to be fully integrated. I mean, that's not quite true. There are these devices that will integrate, but not in this like standard way. And the way that the thing about the standard remote ID is that it will eventually, maybe not now, but will eventually enable beyond visual line of sight operations. So, yeah, yada yada yada. Yeah, there we go. So another thing that I found is that there's some of the stuff is compliant and not compliant with the FAA. The CubeID based stuff, which includes the Here4 stuff, is not listed here, and the moderators on the Cube Pilot discussion forums say that, well, we can't. It's not intended to be a broadcast, so therefore we don't do this. We provide it to you, and you as a manufacturer, even if you're sort of a DIY manufacturer, you are the one that has to get the declaration of compliance, not us. I don't know how true that is. Some people kind of argue about that a little bit, but anyway, it's not listed here. But this is where you would find it. This is actually true for other stuff, which is cool. This is the FAA page on remote ID. Just putting it in here is kind of a helpful resource, I suppose. This is a little bit of documentation, a thread. I'm just going to document some of these threads that I ran across here, but documenting the fact that Cube IDs don't come with a unique ID or a UAS ID. You as the manufacturer have to get one of those from the FAA, and then that's what you put in. And at this point, I was done. And I kind of quickly pulled the trigger on getting this drone tag beacon version 2. This is what Carl bought. I kind of wish I hadn't done this, but it's going to work, I'm sure. So that's good. And maybe I will like it just fine. It's got a long life. So anyway, and it is listed. You can look it up. Drone tag is listed here as a broadcast module. A couple of other notes here. I found this note from Arnold Schober, who said that he has, as a DIYer who builds some drones, sent some paperwork into the FAA and was using Bluemark parts for his work. So I was like, well, let me look at this Bluemark stuff, which I'm glad I did. I think the stuff is pretty cool. They seem to be experts in remote ID, whereas I think CubePilot is mostly about the autopilot, and like they're having to do this remote ID stuff because they have to do it, but not because they want it or excited about it or maybe have enough expertise in it. I don't know. So I'm sure it's not beyond their technical ability. It's just a spread thin kind of an issue. But anyway, Bluemark seems to be have some good products. This is a list of the products that they have, at least many of them or most of them. There's a good YouTube video here that I'm linking. Sort of goes through all of these and what they can do. The DB100 series, this is this sort of like slap it on your drone and go fly. The DB120, which is what I should have bought, is an all-in-one. It's $100, so a lot cheaper than the drone tag unit that I bought. Also has like this kind of neat web server that you can use to turn off sort of just like constant screeching about its position to anybody in the neighborhood, which is neat. And inexpensive. I'm particularly interested in these 200 series stuff. It may be that the Arnold guy used one of these 200 series. He doesn't mention what it was, and I've emailed him and I've asked. But for instance, like this, 201 or potentially even the 210. These are pretty cheap. $50. I would happily, if this would solve my problem, I would pretty happily do it. Yeah, even if it means adding an extra part, because it's a couple of grams. It's not, the weight doesn't matter. And there's a lot I can do to sort of make the top deck of the BusyBee smaller. I'm using a full-size carrier board. I could shrink that down. There's no reason why it has to be so big. Yeah. This is somebody from, what's this website? RID 107 or something that sells these things. Walks you through how to use an onboard web server on the unit itself to configure it so that it's not always squawking its location, such that busybodies can use these apps. I don't know how I feel about that, but it is true that people can be kind of busybody-like. It's also kind of nice to be able to just pull up an app and track your drone. So I don't know, pluses and minuses. This is how you would do a UAS declaration of compliance. I'm interested in trying this out. I'm going to have to follow up with Alana a little bit and see whether how her work is going, trying to do operations over people. We still have the Avata. I'm still willing to buy the Avata 2. We've got the Mini 4. So we have some ways to try to do operations over people. Um, very interested in this. A little bit more on the 891, the means of compliance process, what that looks like. I did message Arnold on the discuss.ardupilot.org. So we'll see what he says. I'm interested in most of this stuff. I don't want to. I don't. The whole front page of this was rabbit holes. I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes because I always go down too many. But I'd love to get it fully integrated and not have to have a broadcast unit. And the reason is I would like to be in a position where at some point we could do some beyond visual line of sight work. The operations over people are nice. I think that that's always going to be sort of a weight limit issue. But beyond visual line of sight would just open up a lot of work that we need to do. It is incredibly difficult to try to get visual observers where they need to be for some of these projects, and it would lighten the load on that substantially. A lot of word soup going through this stuff. Remote ID, mesh together or not. Drone ID, mesh together or not. Open Drone ID, RG Remote ID, Cube ID. It's hard to Google some of this stuff. I'm putting some links here on where to go to look at this stuff, but yeah, not real fun trying to research this stuff. Kind of including this as a random setup page here. This video tutorial for adding remote ID was quite technical. They do a build of firmware through the very beginning here. There's a bit about like once you do this, it's not supposed to be tampered with, and so that includes some messing around with the firmware. If you have it integrated as a standard remote ID, it is not supposed to arm unless it is working. So I don't know. They're including it here for completeness sake. Although whether or when I'm going to be able to get back to this sort of standard remote ID integration, I don't know. I'm not even sure why I'm putting this in here at this point. Some good discussion, right? So probably should have just pasted in some of that discussion, but it was good. A lot of this led me to like. So, for instance, another requirement for standard remote ID is that you have to be able to declare an emergency. There's supposed to be a button you can press, and on the HereLink, there is a button that you can press. It doesn't work, so that's good in the sense that I don't actually want to declare an emergency. It seems to like always be stuck on. But in QGC, which the new builds supposedly have this, the version of Q Ground Control that I have is like ancient, and so I did run across this GitHub page. So it's got version 4.4.3 on there. I haven't tried to update this yet. I'm totally interested. I would love to do this. I think I'm going to try to take this one step at a time and make sure the thing is still flying before I do this. There's been a lot of upgrading here and upgrading the firmware. I will take the drone tag that I get, which I expect to arrive in the next couple of days, throw that on there, and so we will be legal to fly, and we will see how it goes. It's unclear quite how the loading is going to work. Some people suggest that you can just load this with ADB, which is fine. Or sorry, ADB. But the thing has a SD card port, so I don't know why we can't just like copy it on there and load it up. I mean, I would be pretty interested to have like a web browser so I could just download this stuff and whatnot. So, you don't have too much stuff on your on here, but being able to load this stuff would be handy. Anyway, I will give this a try. I also bought a battery bank. I don't know when this is going to get here. I don't even remember where I ordered it from. Probably IR Lock, so maybe it comes today. but I think we need a battery bank for it. It's just it goes through its power too fast. So I think we need something bigger that can last a little longer. I don't think you'd get 40 minutes out of the default battery that's in there. It's pretty awful. Yeah, and there's no way to swap it out. I haven't tried taking this thing apart. I could probably email Joe Stroop and see if he has done it, but um, I don't know if my battery is just bad or what. But I don't love it.